Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izzo. And coming up in today's newscast, another gift from Trump to Netanyahu. The U.S. says it will now fund Israeli research in the West Bank and the Golan Heights, less than a week before the U.S. presidential election. 2 years after the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history, is anti-Semitism still as bad as it once was, or is it worse? And teaming up on peace, a new sports collaboration between Israel and the UAE is taking the Abraham Accords to the soccer fields. Longtime foes, Israel and Lebanon, are launching a second round of U.S.-mediated talks over their disputed sea border. Delegations from Jerusalem and Beirut reconvening at a UN peacekeeper base today. According to Israel's energy ministry, they are looking to reach an agreement on demarcating the maritime border in a manner enabling the cultivation of natural resources in the area. The two sides held their first round of talks on October 14th and are expected to hold another round tomorrow. Moving on now, the U.S. presidential election is just days away, and Donald Trump is making a last-minute push for peace in the Middle East. Speaking to Fox News on Tuesday, Trump says there could be several countries, even the big ones, that will join the Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Israel. That would follow the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan, who all recently opened diplomatic relations with Israel. Trump said there were more on the way without specifying exactly which countries they were.
We have 5, but we really have probably 9 or 10 that are right in the mix. We're going to have a lot. I think we'll have all of them eventually.
Meanwhile, the United States is effectively lifting a ban on U.S. funding of Israeli scientific research projects conducted in the West Bank and Golan Heights. Last year, the Trump administration effectively backed Israel's right to build West Bank settlements by abandoning a long-held U.S. position that they were inconsistent with international law. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, signed agreements earlier today at a special ceremony in the West Bank settlement of Ariel.
And we will sign a revision that will eliminate the geographic restriction that prohibits the funding of American and Israeli joint research and development and cooperation over the Green Line. We are righting an old wrong and strengthening yet again the unbreakable bond between our two countries.
This is an important victory against all those who seek to delegitimize everything Israeli beyond the 1967 lines. And to those malevolent boycotters, I have a simple message today. You are wrong and you will fail. You are wrong because you deny what cannot be denied.
And it seems like Israelis might be just as invested in the upcoming U.S. election as Americans. After all, the Trump administration's policies toward Israel seem to have had a huge impact on his campaign. A car convoy carrying U.S. Republicans living in Israel made its way this week to the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem in a show of support for Donald Trump, bringing the race for the White House onto the streets of Israel a week before the U.S. election.
What you see here today is one of the most amazing expressions of popular support for President Trump and Vice President Michael Pence and the whole Republican Party. They love Israel. We love them. We love America.
Today, I'm here because we believe that Donald Trump is a hero. Check it out. Donald Trump is a hero not only because of what's going on with Bahrain and Israel peace, Sudan and Israel peace, United Arab Emirates and Israel, finding peace. I don't know what the deal of the century will bring, but I do know that this is a time where we have to stand together as friends and as allies.
Now let's hear from Mark Shuster. He's an expert on U.S.-Israel relations, and he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So first of all, the U.S. election is in just a few days. Trump told Fox News yesterday that there could be up to even 10 countries to normalize ties with Israel. Will he try to push some of those through before the election, and is that even possible?
No, I don't think it's possible at this point. We're 6 days away from the election. I think he even said yesterday or the day before that any additional ties will have to wait until after the election. So I don't think anything else is going to happen between now and then. And ultimately, it's really not dependent so much on President Trump. It depends on what Israel does and what these Arab countries do.
Right.
So I don't expect anything will happen between now and next Tuesday in this regards. He's also been overthinking that this will help him, particularly electorally. The American people really don't care about this at all. So it's a side issue. It's important to us here in Israel. It's not very important in the United States at the moment.
Well, that leads nicely into my next question. We already have, as part of the Abraham Accords, we have normalization deals with 3 different countries. This isn't helping Trump in the polls at all?
No, not in the slightest bit. I mean, he can point to that as one of his very, very few foreign policy successes, because when it comes to the area of foreign policy, he has not had very many successes. So he could say, look at these accords, I've made some success. But the American people right now are interested in 2 things, COVID and the economy, COVID and the economy. And, maybe some people are worried about civil unrest, but no one is particularly concerned about foreign affairs generally. And specifically, nothing that's going on. I mean, look, there's been no wars or anything else in terms of us and the Arab countries or anything that reaches the level that Americans even are paying attention to. It makes it page 5 in newspapers, online. Maybe Fox News covers it towards the beginning of a broadcast, but other than that, it's having no impact at all in the United States as far as I can see. Amongst the Jewish vote, it's a counterpoint for those people who oppose Trump. People who support him can say, look what he's doing in terms of the Abraham Accords and the peace with the Gulf states. And that's a strong point, let's put it that way, in the Jewish-Israel equation, shall we say. But beyond that, and the American people at large, I don't think it makes any difference at all.
Well, another move by Trump for Israel, the State Department announced that the U.S. will now fund scientific research projects in the West Bank and the Golan Heights. What is behind this move now, and why? Is it just because of the upcoming elections?
It's because of the upcoming elections and David Friedman, who really has been more the representative of the settler movement to the Israeli government and to some extent the American government. And that's been his greatest interest. Don't forget, he was involved with the settler movement long before he became ambassador to Israel. And he's saying, well, there's a chance that Trump may lose. So let me get whatever I can get done now and things that can be done by executive order. And I think this can be done. I'm not totally sure, by the way, whether this really is going to have any effect. It specifically affects the Ariel University. And of course, who's the biggest donor to Ariel University? Sheldon Adelson, who of course is one of the biggest Trump supporters, financially and otherwise. So it's being done right now because it can be done right now. And David Friedman is trying to leave a mark on his ambassadorship in the ways that he considers positive.
Interesting. There are hundreds of thousands of eligible voters in the U.S. living in Israel. Are you getting the feeling that most of them are pro-Trump? I mean, we just took a look at a video of some U.S. Republicans on their way to the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, holding pro-Trump flags. Is there an equal pro-Biden movement, or are Israelis mostly pro-Trump?
Okay, American Israelis, let's not talk about Israelis generally. Israelis generally are pro-Trump. American Israelis, I think, are pretty much divided. Mark Zell, who leads the Republican, is very outspoken and he makes loud noises. But most of the pro-Trump Israelis are, by and large, living in the settlements, are by and large religious. On the other side of the equation are the Americans living in Tel Aviv, not so religious, not so right-wing, and they're very much pro-Biden. So they don't make as much noise as the pro-Trump. They didn't do a big rallies like the Trump people. It's like America too. Trump people do big rallies, and Biden people go out and vote. So I think it's pretty evenly divided. I don't think they make as much noise as the pro-Trump people do.
All right, we'll have to wait and see what happens in this much anticipated election. Mark Schulman, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have a great week.
You too. All right, before we move on, let's take a look at the latest COVID-19 numbers in Israel. Since Tuesday, Israel's health ministry recorded 844 new cases, with the number of patients on ventilators at 196. The death toll remains at 2,483. The country is continuing a step-by-step lifting of lockdown restrictions next week that will extend to the beauty industry, with hair and nail salons expected to open up. The government maintaining that as long as cases continue to decline, the restrictions will continue to ease. And now more on the fight against disinformation on social media. Israel has reached out to Twitter with a request to shut down dozens of fake profiles it says are anti-Israel. The Strategic Affairs Ministry says Twitter robots are being deployed to delegitimize the Jewish state. In a sample of 250 handles suspected of inauthentic activity, 170 have reportedly been found to be breaching Twitter rules, the ministry said, providing Twitter with a list of the problematic accounts. Twitter says they are currently investigating this report. And moving back to the United States, where anti-Semitism is as strong as ever, according to a new report by the American Jewish Committee, and those statistics were presented at a Knesset meeting yesterday, marking the 2-year anniversary of the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. Take a look.
Today marks the 2-year anniversary to the massacre in Pittsburgh in the Tree of Life Synagogue, where 11 were murdered and 6 injured in what is the worst historic anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States.
Israeli officials gathered in the Knesset this week to hold meetings with representatives from U.S. Jewish organizations and mark the anniversary of a tragedy. 2 years have passed since the worst anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. 11 Jewish worshippers were murdered in cold blood as they marked the Sabbath in prayer at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue.
The city of Pittsburgh never imagined that it would be the location of the worst anti-Semitic act in American history.
Now officials are saying that while the city has had to recover from the devastating shooting, anti-Semitism isn't going anywhere.
Which is we are seeing manifestations of prejudice in the public conversation in ways we haven't before. A sort of malevolence has been mainstreamed. It's moved from the margins into the middle of our politics in America.
The Anti-Defamation League recently presented a report on the state of anti-Semitism in America, a look at what's changed and what hasn't from the perspective of both Jews and non-Jews.
9 out of 10 American Jews feel that anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States. 8 out of 10 feel that it's a problem that is getting worse from year to year.
Hate in the United States is not going to disappear anytime soon. But according to Mayor Peduto, the memory of those lost in Pittsburgh should serve as a reminder of how to heal.
Real strength comes from the kindness and the empathy that we're able to share. And that real strength has been shown not only on that horrific day, but in the 2 years since, in a community that would not allow itself to be divided by hate.
Nittany Manson, ILTV.
A truly horrific attack. I'm now joined by Avi Mayer, Managing Director of Communications for the American Jewish Committee. He took part in yesterday's meeting at the Knesset, a memorial for the Tree of Life shooting, where he also presented statistics of a new report by the AJC. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with the Pittsburgh anniversary. I understand the meeting was with both Israeli officials, including Isaac Herzog, and remotely with heads of U.S. Jewish organizations and local institutions. What was the main takeaway from that commemoration? How are U.S. Jews and Israelis, by the way, remembering this attack 2 years later? 2 years later, excuse me.
Well, look, it was an important meeting. I was very pleased to see members of Knesset from several different parties in the room to commemorate this horrific anniversary. We did hear from several Jewish leaders, both those who were present in the room and those who were joining us from Zoom, including the head of the Jewish Federation in Pittsburgh, who talked about how his community has grappled with the aftermath of this horrific attack. And what I think really sort of stood out to those in attendance is that this is a problem that has not gone away and in some regards is actually getting worse. As you mentioned, we did present the findings of our State of Anti-Semitism in America report, the first time that anyone has ever surveyed both Jews and non-Jews on their experiences and perceptions of anti-Semitism. And I can tell you that the legislators who were in the room were as shocked as we were by some of those very jarring statistics.
So why don't you give me some of the highlights of the statistics that you presented yesterday? What are the most shocking parts of this report?
We revealed this report actually one day before the anniversary of the Pittsburgh attack. And it was unique in one notable regard. It was the first time that anyone had ever asked both American Jews and American non-Jews about their experiences and perceptions of anti-Semitism. Now, the responses we received from Jews are very similar to the responses we received when we surveyed American Jews last year for the very first time on their experiences and perceptions of anti-Semitism. We saw that 9 out of 10 American Jews do regard anti-Semitism as a serious problem in America. More than 8 out of 10 view it as a problem that is getting steadily worse and has in fact worsened over the past 5 years. We see about a quarter, 24% of American Jews saying that over the past 2 years, they've taken steps to conceal their Jewishness in public out of fear for their safety as Jews. But what really stood out to us, and I think to the legislators in the room yesterday, were the responses that we received from non-Jews. We asked, first of all, whether people knew what anti-Semitism was. And shockingly, almost half of all Americans said that they did not know what anti-Semitism was.
Wow,
25%, truly shocking, absolutely. 25% said that they had heard the term but weren't quite sure what it meant. And 21%, more than 1 out of every 5 Americans, said that they had never heard the term anti-Semitism before. This was truly shocking to us, and again, I believe to the legislators in the room as well. There was a recognition, though, when we explained to them what anti-Semitism is, that is hatred or hostility towards Jews. It is a problem in America, but not to the same extent as American Jews said so. So where 8 out of 10 American Jews said that it is a problem that is getting worse, only 4 out of 10 Americans agreed with that. Whereas 9 out of 10 American Jews said that it is indeed a problem in America, the number sank to about 6 out of 10 Americans. So there's a recognition that it is an issue in the United States, but perhaps not to the same extent as American Jews perceive it. And there may not be quite an understanding of how this is affecting the daily lives of so many American Jews.
Wow, you know, some really shocking statistics. I'm curious, why did the AJC decide this time around to interview non-Jews as well for part of this survey?
It's an excellent question. So after we released our report last year, we had tremendous interest from the federal government, from state and local governments, from our interlocutors and other faith and ethnic communities to learn more about anti-Semitism as it is experienced and perceived by American Jews. We had countless meetings across the country. I presented survey findings at the FBI. We had many, many conversations with a whole bunch of different partners. And one thing that kept coming back to us was the sense that this is incredibly important data and it is so to the conversation around anti-Semitism, but it would also be important for us to understand how this problem is perceived by Americans. Because at the end of the day, we have no greater allies in the fight against anti-Semitism and efforts to combat it than other Americans of all faiths and all backgrounds. And so that is what we tried to do in this conversation, in this report, to really sort of see how Americans of all stripes understand anti-Semitism, how they perceive it, and how we can narrow the gaps that might exist between American Jews and the rest of the general public.
So speaking about, you know, the fight against anti-Semitism, we've seen in the last little while social media giants like Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, working to remove anti-Semitism from their platforms like Holocaust denial. Is this a win in the fight against anti-Semitism? How much work is there still left to do?
So we at AJC have been privileged to engage with social media companies for a while now. And we were very pleased to see this decision announced by Facebook just 2 weeks ago that they would be removing all Holocaust denial and distortion from their platform. This is a direct result of our engagement with Facebook for quite a few years now. We were, of course, pleased to see Twitter make a similar announcement right afterwards. This, as you say, is an ongoing conversation. Holocaust denial and distortion are one piece of the intricate array of anti-Semitic propaganda that exists on social media. And so we'll be engaging those companies in conversations on a whole host of other issues as well to ensure that social media, which is such an important part of our lives, is also a safe space for Jews, no matter their background and no matter their views.
All right, well, it is an ongoing battle. Avi Mayer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And now for something a little bit different. The normalization agreement between Israel and the UAE, as we've mentioned, has led to historic collaborations on so many levels, including sports, specifically soccer, or in Israel, as it's known, football. Yesterday, we learned that the two biggest football organizations in the two countries will work and play together. Here is the official announcement.
خطوة جديدة لبناء جسور العلاقات الرياضية المتينة. اتفاقية هي الأولى من نوعها.
يسر رابطة المحترفين الإماراتية أن تعلن اليوم عن توقيع اتفاقية تعاون وشراكة مع رابطة الدوري الإسرائيلي لكرة القدم.
אני גאה ונרגש ליטול חלק במעמד זה
בו אנו חותמים על הסכם אשר יהווה גשר בין הכדורגל הישראלי לכדורגל באיחוד האמירויות.
دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة وطن التسامح وملتقى شعوب العالم. كرة القدم كانت دائما السبيل الأهم والأسرع للتقارب بين الشعوب، وهذه أواصر التعاون التي نهدف إليها من خلال هذه الاتفاقية.
Okay, let's hear more about this deal from Moti Braunstein, the vice president of the Israeli Professional Football League. Thank you so much for joining us, Moti.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us what exactly is involved in this agreement. How will the two leagues work together?
Generally, this memorandum of understanding is a sort of a basket agreement which aims at getting cooperation in different pillars. Some of them are economical, some are around sport technology, and some are around more social things relating to coexistence in the region. At the moment, we proceed with the economical pillar, but we of course intend to extend this cooperation to different materials.
So will the players actually, will the teams play against each other? What will this look like on the ground in terms of the soccer players specifically?
Well, at the moment, this was just signed, and there are endless opportunities. And having some joint games, some joint peace tournaments, or having some of the competition played on the ground of the other country is pretty much an option that we will consider and explore together. But this will, of course, be only one of the aspects of this cooperation, one which we very seriously consider now.
Okay, so, what kind of an accomplishment is it for the Israeli league to make a deal with an organization from an Arab country? It's probably a historic deal. Am I wrong?
This is, as far as I know, this is the first deal signed between a sports organization of Israeli and Arab countries. So it's very exciting. It goes way beyond the financial part, way beyond the sportive part. It's actually very exciting because we are affiliated with the same organization as some of these organizations from our countries are. And they usually, although on the personal level, they are very nice and pleasant, it's very clear that they're not allowed to contact us, to speak to us, or to refer to us. There's no email correspondence. And suddenly, this agreement comes, and, the excitement from their side as well is very big, and it's like we've been waiting for a long time to be able to work together, to do business together, to promote football together, and also, as part of that, to promote coexistence in the region.
All right, and tell me, how are some of the, the bigger Israeli players feeling about this new deal? What are they most looking forward to?
Well, I assume they might be looking for their opportunities overseas. This is something we should also see. So there might be some exchange of players between the countries. There might be some programs around excellence for youth departments of clubs. Again, the options, and I'm being asked everywhere to be very concrete, but it's hard to be concrete because the options are just indefinite. So again, the sportive side will also be a part of this cooperation.
Okay, an exciting sports collaboration. Moti Braunstein, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It's time to take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be partly cloudy with temperatures at around 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow will be a touch warmer, reaching highs of 83 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius. And just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. I don't have TikTok, but if I did, I would certainly make videos like that where I look like an alien. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.39 shekels to the American dollar and 2.55 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Lauren Izzo. Thank you so much for watching.